I can tell you from speaking to the people there, there is this quest for peace as soon as possible. But the situation on the ground doesn't leave a reason to hope that anytime soon that could happen, because there are still armed groups, advocating for different things. But with the coming of this deal, which comes on the backdrop of the one signed in Washington, people believe that there's going to be an end to hostilities. However, it will remain for the parties on the ground to apply those recommendations. Whether this will happen remains to be seen.
Paul Njai in Cameroon. It's emerged that the former MasterChef presenter John Turode was sacked for directing a grossly offensive racist term towards a colleague on set. BBC News understands that 9 complaints were made against him in total, with 1 upheld. Mr Turode hasn't commented, but earlier this week said that any racial language is wholly unacceptable. Here's our culture reporter, Noor Nanji.
Take them off, one off each of those and make them bigger.
A dramatic 2 weeks, with both of MasterChef's presenters sacked in quick succession. First Greg Wallace and then John Turode, plunging the show into crisis. Now more details have emerged about the allegations against John Turode. It's been reported that the presenter used the N-word at a season wrap party in 2019 while singing along to Kanye West's song Gold Digger. But the claim which was upheld against John Turode relates to the previous year when he allegedly used the same word on set, directing it at a member of staff. He has said he has no recollection of that incident and that he does not believe it happened. Other claims against him ranged from racist and abusive language to junior production staff to sexual language, but were unsubstantiated because of a lack of evidence or witnesses.
You are our final 3 chefs. Congratulations!
His co-host, Greg Wallace's career on the show has already come to an end, as BBC News revealed dozens more allegations against him, including from this woman who used to work on MasterChef.
He then dropped his trousers in front of me. I immediately turned and looked away, and he said, "Oh, I best not walk too quickly. I'm not wearing any underwear."
This week, the same report upheld more than 40 claims against Greg Wallace, including one of unwelcome physical contact. He said he was deeply sorry, but insisted none of the serious allegations had been upheld. The BBC has said that the show is bigger than individuals. And it's now understood the corporation intends to show the new series in some form, despite both Greg Wallace and John Turode being in it, if they can get consent from contributors. Noor Nanji, BBC News.
Stay with us, we've got the sports news coming up and also an interview with Mahmoud Khalil, the graduate of Columbia University, whom the US government wanted to deport, but a federal court ruled could be released without charge. Stay with us. This is BBC News, the headlines. At least 34 people have died after a tourist boat sank in Vietnam's Ha Long Bay. 12 survivors have been found so far by rescue teams. The Syrian president announces an immediate ceasefire in the predominantly Druze area of Sueda province following days of clashes that have reportedly killed 940 people. In Los Angeles, at least 28 people are injured after a vehicle drove into a crowd on Santa Monica Boulevard. Time to look at the sports news now with Carthy. Hello.
Hello, thank you very much. Well, it has been a fascinating first few days at golf's Open Championship. The world number one, Scottie Scheffler, is top of the leaderboard at Royal Portrush. And our reporter, Ben Cratcher, is there for us, can bring us up to date on the state of play on day 3 and a certain Rory McIlroy having a good day, Ben.
He is indeed, but nobody, Carthy, is running away with this Open Championship at the minute. It is getting tight at the top of the leaderboard. More on McIlroy's progress in a second, but the leader right now is the world number one, Scottie Scheffler. Started the day with a one-shot lead and was very steady. Par golf through his first 6 holes, but then made a stunning eagle on the 7th hole. It's a par 5 that just snuggles the Antrim coast here. So he is leading by 1 shot at the minute. Matt Fitzpatrick just behind him after birdieing that 7th hole. On to McIlroy then. What a start he made, delighting the thousands of fans, just lining every single hole that he plays. Birdie, birdie, par birdie to start his round. Then it went quiet and we just heard an enormous roar behind us as he made a beautiful eagle on the par 5 12th hole. Let's bring you up to speed with the state of play then. Midway through this 3rd round of the Open Championship. Scheffler leading by 1 from Matt Fitzpatrick as they approach the turn. Hao Tong Lee just 3 shots behind. Tyrrell Hatton an eagle on that 7th hole as well, holing out from the fairway to sit on 8 under par. And then McIlroy is there with the defending champion Xander Schauffele as well. The leaders just coming up to the turn. Still time though for somebody to put themselves in pole position to get their hands on that claret jug tomorrow evening. Carthy.
Yeah, very interesting day. Lovely location too, Ben Cratcher. Thank you very much. On to cricket now, and India's women are in action against England in their 2nd one-day international at Lord's. India lead the 3-match series 1-0. Play was reduced to 29 overs per side because of heavy rain in London this morning. England won the toss and chose to bowl first. India were in a bit of trouble, slipping to 89 for 5, but they finished on 143 for 8, and England are just starting their reply. They're currently 26 without loss. Rugby Union and the British and Irish Lions have won their opening test against Australia with a 27 points to 19 win in Brisbane. In a first half of missed opportunities for the tourists, they still went in with a 17-5 lead at half-time after 3 tries, the last to Tom Curry. Dan Sheehan added a further score shortly after the break, and although there was a late rally from the Wallabies, it wasn't enough. The Lions head coach Andy Farrell says the back rows that were selected justified their inclusion with their performances.
Immense, absolutely immense. Big game players who were probably challenged by a good few, and I think it told a story. I think Tom Curry put in some really nice shots defensively, and Tyburn got the turnover very early doors, set the tone really, and I don't think it stopped there. He carried on for the rest of the game.
Alexander Usyk and Daniel Dubois meet in the ring later at Wembley Stadium in London as the undisputed heavyweight championship of the world title is up for grabs. Dubois was stopped by the unbeaten Usyk in 2023, but has won 3 fights in a row since then, collecting the IBF world title on the way. But most experts do have Usyk as a likely winner on points.
Daniel has a chance. I don't see this. A lot of people are kind of ruling Daniel out completely, and they don't give him a chance. He has a chance. I see this as a 60-40 sort of fight in Usyk's favour. Daniel's a real confidence fighter. He performs when he's full of confidence better. But Usyk's the man. He's a box of tricks. He's so difficult to beat.
That's all from the BBC Sports Centre for now.
Carthy, thank you. Mahmoud Khalil is a Columbia University graduate. He was arrested by US immigration agents on the 8th of March. The US government wanted to deport him, arguing his activism was detrimental to its foreign policy interests. But in late June, after spending more than 100 days in immigration detention, a federal judge ruled that Mr. Khalil was not a flight risk or threat to his community and could be released. Mahmoud Khalil has sat down with our correspondent Nomi Iqbal and told her about his experience.
Being separated from Noor at the time of her pregnancy was the most horrifying thing that happened to me, and that was the only thing that I was thinking about. I wasn't really much concerned about my deportation as much as I was concerned about the well-being of Noor, about the just like being with her, about what's actually happening there, and I was fearing the moment of like the birth of my son would come and I wouldn't be there.
You did ask though, didn't you?
We did ask, and that was again the minimum that they could do. However, you know, what happens is not about bureaucracy. It was measured, calculated cruelty by the administration against me. They wanted, the Trump administration wanted to make an example out of me so that anyone who dared to speak against this administration and speak against Israel crimes in Palestine, they would be punished. And this is what he wanted. Of course, he did not get that, and yeah, this is what should scare everyone in this country. Everyone should be scared of this administration's overreach and just a blatant ignorance of the rule of law, of due process, because it's not about non-citizens or about Palestinians. It's about anyone who dares to speak against power in this country.
Getting on to the Trump administration, they have accused you of being anti-Semitic, a Hamas supporter, and they say that your actions pose a threat to US foreign policy, and their big foreign policy is to crack down on anti-Semitism. What do you say to those accusations?
These accusations are absurd and dangerous at the same time. And I take anti-Semitism and racism concerns, discrimination very seriously. But they don't have any place in the Palestine liberation movement in this country. And Jewish students and just Jewish citizens in this country are an integral part of the Palestine liberation movement. So it's just the anti-Semitism accusation or the terrorism accusations are just smokescreen. They're trying to weaponize anti-Semitism against freedom of speech because they want to shut down the conversation. They don't want anyone to discuss Israeli crimes. They don't want anyone to discuss US complicity in the genocide in Gaza. And it's the same happening with conflating pro-Palestine activism with pro-terror activism, because their goal is not to actually reflect on what these protesters are protesting about. Their concern is just like to shut down that conversation. And if there is, I mean, I was so once again, like I was so. Sort of like I laughed when I saw that allegation about a foreign policy threat, because in my mind at that point, like if it's the threat to Israel, US foreign policy, like there isn't any threat, like it's thriving. But if they say it's about combating anti-Semitism, it is this administration, the Trump administration, that's actually fueling anti-Semitism, whether in the United States or around the world, by siding with right-wing parties across Europe, notably the neo-Nazi AfD, Germany's AfD, or by supporting a state that's committing a genocide in the name of the Jewish people.
What do you make of the criticism that some people have who say, well, you're green card, you're not an American, and so you have to abide by certain rules, that the same rules for Americans don't apply to you, and that you're here stirring trouble?
Yeah, the US Constitution is very clear that freedom of speech expands to everyone in this country, regardless of their status, whether citizens or not citizens. And the other thing, what I was protesting was simply I did not want my tuition fees, my tax money, to be used towards supporting Israel, a country that's killing my people. It's as plain, as simple as that, and it's actually it's everyone's duty to oppose war crimes, to oppose a genocide. It's not whether you are a citizen or not, because this is a very dangerous mindset to think that some people have rights and other peoples don't have rights, because then it's not democracy for all. It's actually very selective democracy, and I don't believe that democracy should be that way.
Did you get any support from your university at all? Because we've seen Columbia University saying that it's unsafe for Jewish students and what have you. Did you feel that anything was being done for someone like you or for others Arab students, for example?
Columbia University failed all its students, including Palestinians, Muslims, Jewish, and basically all the student body. They failed them. And in my case, Columbia did not provide any support whatsoever. They did not even contact me now 4 months after my arrest. And Columbia only cares about its brand. They would do whatever it takes to protect that brand and to protect the money of the endowment, whether it is now that, like cracking down on Palestinian students and nurturing that racist environment against Palestinians at Columbia. They would do it because this is what's required now. And in the 30s, they were siding with Nazi Germany. That was actually one of the first students who were expelled from Columbia, because that student opposed a Columbia delegation to Nazi Germany.
Do you plan to take on Columbia University in any way? I mean, I know you're taking on the Trump administration, right? You've filed this lawsuit against them, so I'm just curious to know if you're planning to do anything like that.
Absolutely. I'm seeking accountability against everyone who had or has done any wrongdoing against me, including Columbia Universities, including Columbia University affiliates who contributed to this doxing and smear campaign against me online. And I'm discussing all options now with my lawyers.
If you win the lawsuit, for example, against Trump, what would you do with that kind of success?
Absolutely, I would use any money that I would receive from any settlement to support the individuals impacted by the Trump administration racist and fascist policies, and Colombia's also just unjust and unjust disciplinary against the students. Now there are over 100 Columbia students who were either expelled or suspended from the university for simply protesting the war on Gaza, and they need support with that.
Do you want to stay in America?
Yeah, that's why I'm fighting.
I wonder if you see your future anywhere else, or do you want to stay here?
No, this is what I'm fighting. I'm fighting so America, this country, can be a place where I can raise my kids, a place that respects human rights, a country that respects international law and doesn't fund a genocide. That's why I'm basically fighting now.
You've gone through a lot. Would you change anything, or would you do it all again?
I absolutely don't regret protesting a genocide. I don't regret standing up with my people. What I regret is actually the violence that was inflicted on us by Columbia University, by the Trump administration. And would I have done things differently? I mean, the core thing, opposing a genocide, I don't think I would have done that differently. Of course, there were opportunities to build more bridges, to communicate better, and any of that. But that's beside the core thing, which is opposing a genocide. And when people think about it, I did not do anything extraordinary. Like I did, protest a genocide as anyone around the world should be doing right now.
I suppose your message to the Trump administration is that you're not going to be quiet.
No, I believe there's no option to be quiet when my people are being slaughtered. I don't think any attempts to suppress freedom of speech, and in particular Palestinian speech in this country would succeed. This is why I will continue to advocate for the rights of my people in this country, as I should. It's again my duty. I'm one of those lucky Palestinians who are now not under Israeli bombs. So I want to use that privilege to actually advocate for my people.
Mahmoud Khalil speaking to Nomi Iqbal. President Zelensky says Ukrainian cities have been bombarded by more than 300 drones and more than 30 missiles in the latest Russia air attacks. In Odessa, officials say one person was killed and at least 6 injured when a drone strike set a high-rise block of flats ablaze. A woman died after being pulled from a burning apartment, according to rescue services. Ukraine's president said critical infrastructure was also damaged in Sumy in the northeast, with several thousand families suffering power cuts. The head of the Dnipropetrovsk region said that the city of Pavlohrad suffered a hellish night with damage to sites including industrial sites and a fire station. Meanwhile, Russia says it shot down 71 Ukrainian drones, with the Rostov and Moscow regions among those targeted. It comes a day after the EU adopted a sweeping new package of sanctions against Russia, looking to pile more pressure on the Kremlin by lowering the price cap for Moscow's oil exports. Our reporter, Oksana Kurirenko, who's in Lviv in western Ukraine, has more on the night's developments.
This is unfortunately business as usual for Ukrainians to have sleepless nights when Russia launches combined attacks. Its missiles and drones. Almost entire Ukrainian territory was covered. Here in the western Ukraine, we were woken at about 4 a.m. with these air raids, and we were following, the trajectory of the missiles flying basically over us on special maps and apps. In Odessa, the whole residential building was hit. Several floors on fire. And firefighters and volunteers were rushing to save people. Unfortunately, they didn't save everyone. So this is how we spend the nights in Ukraine. As the day comes here, you can see I'm in a very tourist region. People have their lives going on. They rest with their children. And as I traveled throughout the western Ukraine in several regions, you can still see the signs of war. For example, in every town you have these makeshift monuments with huge portraits of fallen soldiers. And on train stations you can see people in military uniforms saying heartfelt goodbyes to their families. So this is how it is in Ukraine now, and unfortunately people do not have much rest.
Oksana Kundarenko in Lviv. Hundreds of Venezuelans deported from the US have arrived back home from a notorious jail in El Salvador in exchange for 10 Americans held in Venezuela. The prisoner swap agreement ends a months-long ordeal triggered by President Trump's crackdown on immigration. The Venezuelan men were originally accused by the US of gang crimes and deported to El Salvador. Our Central America correspondent Will Grant reports.
The release of these more than 250 Venezuelan men from the most notorious prison in the Americas brings to an end one of the most controversial episodes of Donald Trump's harsher new immigration enforcement laws. Basically, the families of those men said that they were never involved with gang crimes either here in the United States or in Venezuela, or most certainly not in El Salvador, where they have been held for the past 4 months. Now, on announcing the prisoner swap, the State Department and US Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that they were indeed gang members from the Tren de Aragua gang in Venezuela. So they have never abandoned that claim on the side of the Trump administration. And of course, those men have been sent back to Caracas in exchange for 10 Americans coming in the other direction back into US custody. Marco Rubio said that up until now, Venezuela was the country where most Americans were unjustly held in Venezuelan prisons, and that is now no longer the case. So there has been something out of this for both sides. The government of Venezuela, of course, finally gets the release of those more than 250 Venezuelans held in the Secot prison. Nayib Bukele, the president of El Salvador, and a close ally of Donald Trump's, shows that he has remained loyal to Donald Trump, remained to the very end of this process, saying that these men were gang members and that he's releasing them back to Venezuela for them to do as they see fit. And of course, the Trump administration says that it now has, of course, these 10 Americans heading back to the US. Something for everybody, arguably, except for those families who've been through absolute desperation over the past 4 months. I've been in touch with one of the mothers of the Venezuelan men throughout this process. Of course, this is a huge moment of relief for her and for the extended family, but the anguish that they have been through throughout this process, when they say their children have never committed any crime in El Salvador, has been brutal.
Will Grant. Apple's filing a lawsuit against YouTuber Jon Prosser, aka Front Page Tech. The tech giant's accusing him of scheming to steal Apple's trade secrets to leak the long-awaited iOS 26. Our reporter Tamsin Craftman explains why Apple's suing.
Apple has filed a complaint with the US federal court accusing Jon Prosser and his alleged co-conspirator Michael Ramacotti of taking advantage of an Apple employee's development phone and accessing it without their knowledge in order to leak information about this hotly awaited iOS 26, which should be coming to iPhones very, very shortly. Now, according to Apple, the employee has actually since been fired for failing to adhere to their confidentiality protocol. Prosser is denying that any of the information that he's been using in his YouTube videos about this new software was obtained illegally. And in the last 24 hours, he took to X to say that this is not how the situation played out at all, saying that he did not plot to obtain the information through accessing a person's phone. And actually, he's completely unaware of how the information came to be because he obtained the information through an anonymous source.
Why is this accusation so significant?
So, leaks happen a lot throughout many tech companies, and Apple, have dealt with this quite a lot. But it's not really happened on US soil before. We've seen so many leaks with Apple software all throughout the supply chain in other countries. But now it's happened on US soil, Apple have a lot more legal power to actually fight back.
What's the impact going to be on YouTubers then?
So amongst the tech YouTube community, it's so common for them to speak about these leaks, the possibilities for new software. But regardless of the outcome of this lawsuit, I think so many YouTubers are going to be very fearful of speaking about these leaks and actually really thinking about where the information has actually come from.
Why does it matter, though, if it's about an operating system, that you're going to, if you're an Apple phone user, for example, you're going to need it anyway?
True, but as Apple have stated, many of their employees have spent years and there's so many resources that go into this information. It can be so damaging for a company to have this information given out before they're ready to release it, especially because there's so many levels of testing and it provides so many opportunities for other tech companies to go in and start developing their own ideas based off of these leaks.
But briefly, we're still talking about Apple, so there's some publicity in it in a bizarre way, isn't there too?
Yes, of course, and I think you are right there, but ultimately Apple seem very determined to protect the work of their employees.
Tamsin Craftman. Aberdeen's waters are usually frequented by vessels serving the oil and gas industry, but as a host port, it's currently being taken over by dozens of traditional tall ships taking part in an international race. Ben Phillip reports.
A scene from the golden age of sailing. One by one, a fleet of majestic vessels have made their proud entrance into Aberdeen over the past couple of days. Around 50 ships from across the globe have dropped anchor here after racing from France, some from as far afield as Peru, Uruguay and Oman. The festival officially opened this morning. The weather has taken a bit of a turn though. There's a yellow warning for heavy rain in place until tomorrow, but that won't put off the hundreds of thousands of visitors who are expected to descend on this quayside over the next few days.
The crowds are spectacular today. I mean, I've never seen so much people down Aberdeen Harbour in a long time. It's spectacular, great event for the city.
What do you make of what you see?
I think they're fantastic. You don't appreciate the size of these vessels until you're up close to them.
One of the first to arrive this week was the Polish Friedrich Chopin. Competing in the large ship Class A category, it won the race last year.
It has a special box to protect it.
Oh wow.
And this is a trophy.
It's really quite heavy.
Yeah.
And you'll be hoping you'll be able to defend this?
Yes, we try very hard to defend it.
And they're away.
The first tall ships race was held in 1956. The route from Devon to Lisbon was organised to promote training for young people in the art of sailing. Decades later, and those early principles haven't changed. More than one half of each ship's crew must be aged 15 to 25.
It's something completely new and out of my comfort zone, so hopefully just like something different that I've never done before and learn lots of new skills and make memories.
The ships are in town until Tuesday before they set sail once again for the next stop across the North Sea to Norway before crossing the finishing line in Denmark in August. Ben Phillip, BBC News, Aberdeen.
That's all from me. Lauren Taylor is with you next. Bye for now.
Live from London, this is BBC News. Donald Trump says troublemakers will never be satisfied in a new outburst over claims that he wrote a suggestive note to Jeffrey Epstein. At least 34 people have died after a tourist boat sank in Vietnam's Ha Long Bay. Rescue teams have so far located 12 survivors. The Syrian president announces an immediate ceasefire in the predominantly Druze area of Sueda province following days of clashes that have reportedly killed 940 people. Dozens of people have been arrested around the UK at protests in support of Palestine Action. And in sport, Rory McIlroy makes a strong start on day 3 of the Open, but can he catch the leaders? Hello, I'm Lauren Taylor. Donald Trump has weighed in again on the row over legal files relating to the late sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein. On Friday, he asked for grand jury testimony to be made public. But now, in a possible sign of frustration with the ongoing controversy, he's also said troublemakers will never be satisfied, no matter what action he takes. In a post on his Truth Social website, he said, "I've asked the Justice Department to release all grand jury testimony with respect to Jeffrey Epstein, subject only to court approval." He then adds, "With that being said, and even if the court gave its full and unwavering approval, nothing will be good enough for the troublemakers and radical left lunatics making the request." And he concludes, "It'll always be more, more, more." Well, that comes after President Trump said he was seeking at least $10 billion in damages from the Wall Street Journal and its owner, Rupert Murdoch, after the paper reported that he wrote a suggestive birthday message to Epstein. Mr. Trump says the document is fake. The paper says it will defend its reporting vigorously. Our North America correspondent, Arunde Mukherjee, reports from Washington.
President Trump's past relationship with Jeffrey Epstein in the spotlight once again. Even more now, after the Wall Street Journal article reported allegations that Donald Trump's name appeared on a letter including a drawing of a naked woman sent to Jeffrey Epstein for his 50th birthday in 2003. Calling the publication a useless rag, accusing it of peddling fake news, Mr. Trump now taking legal action against them and its owner, media tycoon Rupert Murdoch. Also on Trump's orders, the Justice Department has applied for some of the transcripts in the Epstein case to be released in public interest. But that is subject to court approval and could be a lengthy process. All of this happening even as the US president faces increasing pressure to release details on the Epstein investigations, including those from his political base of Make America Great Again supporters.
Make some noise if you care about the Jeffrey Epstein scandal.
Many angry that he's not published government documents, including the names of Epstein's clients. 6 months ago, the Attorney General said she was preparing to publish Epstein's so-called client list.
It's sitting on my desk right now to review. That's been a directive by President Trump.
After falling out with Donald Trump, Elon Musk posted on X in June that Trump is in the Epstein files. The White House rubbished the post, which Musk later deleted. Last week, the Department of Justice concluded Epstein did not have a client list that could implicate high-profile people and that he did take his own life, contradicting long-held right-wing beliefs. Earlier this week, President Trump declared the whole Epstein conspiracy theory was just a hoax. But even die-hard Trump fans are not buying it, demonstrating their anger and feelings of betrayal. Even right-wing podcasters, too, finding it difficult to let it go.
Obviously, the Trump administration is trying to cover up. Something changed because they ran on this idea of exposing it all.
As the story plays out both legally and politically, what is certain is that the more Donald Trump asked people to move on from Jeffrey Epstein, the more the focus remains on the story. Arunodaya Mukherjee, BBC News, Washington.
Let's speak now to Shira Shendlin, a former US federal judge who joins us from New York. We should also note that the law firm Judge Shendlin currently works for has represented some of Jeffrey Epstein's victims, but she's not been involved in those cases. Thanks very much indeed for being with us. I just want to start with the Epstein documents. What is it that has been requested for release, this grand jury testimony? Tell us how significant that is and what we get from that.
Right. So it's very important to understand there's two sets of documents. There's grand jury testimony, the transcript of that testimony, but there's also documents that are not part of the grand jury at all. So the executive branch controls the documents produced by the FBI or by the prosecutors. That's in the hands of the executive branch, and the executive branch, which is the attorney general or the president, can decide to release those. Then there's grand jury testimony, a grand jury record, and that's in the hands of the judiciary. Now that the government has requested the release of grand jury material, it is up to the judge to decide whether to release those materials.
And how likely is it that a judge would decide to release it?
So there's a controlling case in the Second Circuit, which is the New York Court of Appeals, the federal circuit in New York. And it happened to be a lower court case of mine that went up to the Second Circuit on appeal. And I was affirmed, but in that decision, the Second Circuit set forth nine criteria that would help the judge decide whether to release it. And it said, first of all, that the court has the discretion to do it, and it's a very broad discretion that the judge has. And it depends if there are special circumstances. And so it said public curiosity alone is not enough, but there are other things that should be considered. So first one is, who's the party seeking the disclosure? And here it's the government, and that's pretty powerful, because the second question is whether the defendant or the government opposes disclosure. Well, Epstein's dead. He's not opposing disclosure. Maxwell may have been a subject of that grand jury, and I don't know if she's taken a position, but the government is seeking it, so the government's not opposing it. The third factor is, why is the disclosure sought? And the reason seems to be because of public interest here. The fourth factor is, what exact information is being sought? And we don't know that. I don't know if they're seeking more than just a certain witness testimony or the entire transcript. The fifth factor, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask you whether, so there's quite a lot of factors to be considered here. And, and you mentioned that it's not just grand jury testimony that is available. If it's just grand jury testimony that is released eventually by a judge, will that answer the public's questions, or will there still be more coming out?
Well, there should be more. I don't know the answer because I don't know what's in the grand jury testimony. No one knows right now. But I assume that the bulk of the information is actually the FBI documents, the Department of Justice documents, the prosecutor's documents. That's what the executive can control, and that's what probably should be released. It is not secret. The public has an interest. A lot of people have an interest in that, including victims. So the bulk of the documents, I think I've heard 80%, is in the executive branch, not in the grand jury.
And in the meantime, President Trump is also now suing the Wall Street Journal and its owner, Rupert Murdoch, over the publication of a story that they said he'd sent a lewd birthday message to Mr. Epstein. Tell us how you think that's going to play out.
Well, that's a tough one, because if you're suing for defamation and you're a public figure, and there's no question that Donald Trump is a public figure, so he has to prove actual falsity and that the publisher acted with actual malice. And that's a really high bar. That's a very famous Supreme Court case here, Sullivan versus New York Times. So it's not so clear to me that they can prove either, that he can prove actual falsity or actual malice. We'll have to see what it shows. But of course, he's claiming this birthday card is fake. But if you look at it, well, it kind of looks like something Donald Trump might send somebody on their birthday.
And Mr. Trump has sued other media outlets recently and has also threatened legal action against media outlets. In a couple of cases, these media outlets have settled. How likely is a settlement in this case with the Wall Street Journal?
I don't think it's likely at all. CBS settled, but CBS is being widely criticized for that settlement, saying they had a strong case and probably would have won. But they may have had their own reasons for wanting to settle that had nothing to do with having done anything wrong in editing the transcript of the interview. I'm sure media knows, it's done all the time. So there's nothing wrong with that, but it chose to settle for its own reasons. One might be it needs government approval of an upcoming sale and merger. So who knows? So I think it's going to be a tough case for Trump to prove, but if he wants to go at it, and it sounds like Murdoch and Wall Street Journal are going to defend vigorously, I wouldn't give Trump a strong chance of winning this one.
Shira Shendlin, thank you very much indeed for your thoughts on the subject. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Now, at least 34 people have died after a tourist boat sank off the coast of Vietnam. The vessel was carrying 48 passengers and 5 crew when it capsized during sudden heavy rain, strong winds and lightning. Rescuers say continual rain is hindering their search. It's thought around 14 people are still missing. Local media report that most of the people on board are families visiting from the capital, Hanoi. Vietnam's Prime Minister has sent his condolences to the families of the victims. Authorities say they're working to investigate the cause of the incident. The boat capsized in Ha Long Bay, a UNESCO World Heritage Site located around 125 miles northeast of Hanoi. Ha Long Bay is one of Vietnam's most popular tourist destinations, attracting millions of visitors each year, with boat tours especially popular. Syrian internal security forces are deploying in the south of the country to try to end deadly clashes between different factions. There have been fears that these, the sectarian fighting could escalate into another regional crisis after Israel also became involved. Israel has been striking Damascus and the province of Suwaida, saying its forces were seeking to protect the minority Druze community. Israel and Syria have now agreed a ceasefire. More than 700 people are reported to have been killed in the province since last Sunday amid local violence. From Damascus, here's our correspondent John Donnison, and a warning: you may find some details in his report distressing.
This morning, in and around Suwaida, it didn't look much like a ceasefire. Bedouin tribesmen in running gun battles with fighters from the minority Druze community. We will go to their houses and kill them in their homes, said this Bedouin, Abuz Jazem. In Suwaida itself, this exclusive video attained by the BBC World Service shows a Druze family of 6 who appear to have been shot as they slept. Who killed them is not known. The Syrian army has now set up checkpoints around Suwaida to try to restore calm. It came after President Ahmed al-Sharaa announced the new ceasefire. He's previously been accused, though, of siding with the Bedouin tribes. The last time he did that, Israel struck Damascus, wary of having Syrian forces, some aligned with al-Qaeda, close to its northern border. So Israel had to sign up to this ceasefire too. Here in the capital, Damascus, life feels relatively stable, but this is a big and fractured country. There are many competing factions as well as external forces who want a say in the country's future. After a decade or more of conflict, Syria is not yet at peace. John Donnison, BBC News, Damascus.
Let's go live now to Damascus, and John Donnison is there for us now. And John, it seems at this stage the ceasefire is pretty fragile.
Very much so. I mean, I think the ceasefire between the Syrian government and Israel is in place, but the fighting between those Bedouin tribesmen and members of the Druze community in the south has been ongoing throughout the day, really. We've seen some pretty chaotic video footage coming out of the south showing running gun battles in the streets, more allegations of atrocities being committed by both sides. We have seen the Syrian army deploy in some considerable number to the south. They have been setting up roadblocks around Suwaida to try and put a lid on what has been now almost a week of fighting, but I don't think it's over yet.
And you mentioned the element of Israel. Tell us more about the US's role in securing that ceasefire with Israel.
Well, the US was very keen to get that ceasefire in place. Of course, it's been pressuring Israel as well to do a ceasefire, well, a few weeks ago with Iran and then also with Hamas in Gaza. America doesn't want another unstable country in the Middle East. Now, Israel's position is that it is wary of the new Syrian government here. It doesn't want its forces being deployed south, close to the border with Israel. At the same time, it wants to try and protect members of the Druze community in Syria, because Israel also has a substantial Druze community, many of them living in the occupied Golan Heights, just on Israel's northern border with Syria. So earlier in the week. When we saw Syria deploy forces to the south, Israel ended up striking targets in Damascus because it didn't want those forces so far south. I think what's happened in the last few days, probably because of that pressure from the United States, is in effect Israel has given permission for the Syrians to deploy south as long as they try and protect that Druze community in the south.
And on the issue of minorities, what kind of assurances has the Syrian government made about their future and going forward?
Well, it's tried to make them, but as I said in my report, I mean, you really got a sense there of what a complicated, complex country this is. And of course, it comes on the back of decades of dictatorship here. Then you had a popular uprising. The dictatorship was basically run by one minority faction in Syria. There are many other different factions, and all of them want to say in Syria's future. And when you've got outside forces as well wanting a say in that future, things do get very complicated indeed. But what's different here, I think, than in, say, Libya 10 years ago when you had the fall of Muammar Gaddafi, and very reminiscent scenes there, really, which led to years of instability in Libya. The difference is that Syria is much more important than Libya in terms of the broader regional stability across the Middle East.
John Donnison, thank you very much indeed. The Hamas-run civil defense agency in Gaza says 32 Palestinians seeking food have been killed by Israeli gunfire. It said more than 100 were injured near two distribution centres run by the US and Israeli-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. The latest deaths happened near Khan Yunis and Rafah. The GHF said there were no incidents at or near their sites today. The IDF says it's investigating, citing an overnight incident in the Rafah area where troops fired warning shots at suspects. Our correspondent Emir Nader says incidents at aid distribution points are increasingly common.
It seems to be becoming a daily occurrence where Palestinians in the most vulnerable of states seeking food to provide for their families are having to go to these aid points, which are set up by this new controversial US and Israeli-backed system. And we're seeing daily scenes of chaos, violence and indeed death. In this latest instance, we've heard eyewitness reports pointing the finger at the Israeli military, saying that when they arrived at the aid site, the Palestinians seeking food, they were approached by jeeps and tanks who began firing at them, not in order to organise or to scare them, said one eyewitness, but it seemed intended, targeted to kill. Now, we have gone to the Israeli military for comment about today's incident, and they have said that they were present at the site and that their troops did use gunfire, but only warning shots to try to control the crowd. They said it took place before the aid site opened, and their troops were approached by a number of so-called suspects who they deemed posed a threat to their troops, and so the troops used warning shots. But it's just another one of almost these daily incidents. Last week we saw a huge crush that led to dozens of deaths in one of the aid sites, and the Israeli military and the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation have talked about implementing lessons learned around these aid sites to try and improve the management of people and the distribution of food. But so far we are seeing no impact on the ability of Palestinians to safely secure food.
55 people have been arrested for displaying signs in support of Palestine Action during protests in central London. Large crowds gathered in Parliament Square, rallying against the decision to officially make the group a proscribed terrorist organisation. Some were carried away by officers, while others were placed in handcuffs and led from the scene. The Metropolitan Police had warned those supporting the group would likely face arrest. Our correspondent Nick Johnson reports from central London.
So what's been happening is a large number of protesters have gathered here in Parliament Square in central London, many of them turning up with handwritten placards. You can see one of the police officers there holding one. It says, "I oppose genocide, I support Palestine Action." And of course, over the past few weeks, Palestine Action has been prescribed as a terrorist organisation by the UK government. It means if you show support for the group, you can face up to 14 years in prison. And what's been happening is the police came in very swiftly after this protest started in Parliament Square. They've taken people who've been holding those banners away. Some have had to be carried away, some have been helped away. The people who appear to have been arrested have chosen not to say anything to the police when asked. And you can see here these lines of police vans. These police vans go back behind the camera as well, all the way around Parliament Square. And the protesters who appear to have been holding those placards have been taken to these vans and put inside. Some of the protesters have chosen to continue with chanting while they've been arrested. Others have chosen not to. And the police here have taken a very swift approach to those holding those placards, which appear to show support for Palestine Action. But they're also watching for any chants which in their view might incite hatred or support for Palestine Action, and the police are monitoring those as well. The next stage of court action by Palestine Action to oppose its prescription as a terrorist organisation is happening in court here in London tomorrow.
In Poland, anti-immigration protests organised by far-right political groups have taken place in dozens of towns and cities across the country. The gatherings were organised by far-right nationalist groups, including Confederation, which is the 6th largest group in Parliament. Most of the protests attracted just a few hundred people, and there were smaller counter-protests in several cities. Official statistics suggest that illegal migration into Poland has been falling, with the number of people trying to cross into the country from Belarus down 30% year-on-year so far in 2025. At least 7 people are in a critical condition after a car drove into a crowd outside a music venue in Los Angeles early on Saturday. Police say the driver was dragged from his vehicle and beaten and shot. He's been taken to hospital. Most of the 30 people injured in the incident were women. The club had been hosting a reggae hip-hop event, and there'd been a fight outside the venue prior to the incident.
It was a very chaotic scene on arrival. So apparently a vehicle had drove through a crowd. There was a crowd who was waiting to go into a club. There was also a taco stand and there was a valet stand. So the vehicle drove through the taco stand, valet stand, and through a crowd of people. Out of the 30 patients, we transported a total of 23 of those patients. 7 of them were in critical condition. Another 6 were delayed or had other serious injuries as well. And then 10 were transported with minor injuries.
The Democratic Republic of Congo and the M23 rebel group have signed a ceasefire deal in Qatar. The African Union Commission called it a major milestone in peace efforts. Last month, the Congolese government and Rwanda, which denies accusations that it backs the rebels, signed a US-brokered peace deal designed to end decades of conflict. Few details have been given. Well, here's how the US presidential envoy to the region, who took part in the peace process, reacted to the agreement.
It's a region that has suffered for too long, at least 3 decades, at least 6 million lives were lost, and millions of displaced and refugees are suffering.
Thousands of people from around the world will be in Aberdeen this weekend for the annual Tall Ships Race. It's promising to be one of the biggest tourist events in Scotland this year, with organisers saying that they'll turn the area into a party city. Ben Phillip reports.
A scene from the golden age of sailing. One by one, a fleet of majestic vessels have made their proud entrance into Aberdeen over the past couple of days. Around 50 ships from across the globe have dropped anchor here after racing from France, some from as far afield as Peru, Uruguay and Oman.
The festival officially opened this morning. The weather has taken a bit of a turn though. There's a yellow warning for heavy rain in place until tomorrow, but that won't put off the hundreds of thousands of visitors who are expected to descend on this quayside over the next few days.
The crowds are spectacular today. I mean, I've never seen so much people down Aberdeen Harbour in a long time. It's spectacular, great event for the city.
What do you make of what you see?
I think they're fantastic. You don't appreciate the size of these vessels until you're up close to them.
One of the first to arrive this week was the Polish Friedrich Chopin. Competing in the large ship Class A category, it won the race last year.
It has a special box to protect it.
Oh wow.
And this is a trophy.
It's really quite heavy.
Yeah.
And you'll be hoping you'll be able to defend this?
Yes, we try very hard to defend it.
And they're away.
The first tall ships race was held in 1956. The route from Devon to Lisbon was organised to promote training for young people in the art of sailing. Decades later, and those early principles haven't changed. More than one half of each ship's crew must be aged 15 to 25.
It was something completely new and out of my comfort zone, so hopefully just like something different that I've never done before and learn lots of new skills and make memories.
The ships are in town until Tuesday before they set sail once again for the next stop across the North Sea to Norway before crossing the finishing line in Denmark in August. Ben Phillip, BBC News, Aberdeen.
And just a quick reminder, there's plenty more stories for you anytime on our website. Details there of dozens killed by Israeli gunfire near aid sites in southern Gaza. That's according to the Hamas-run ministry there. Do stay with us here on BBC News. I'll be back with the headlines shortly. Bye for now. This is BBC News, the headlines. At least 34 people have died after a tourist boat sank in Vietnam's Ha Long Bay. The Wonder Sea boat was reportedly carrying 53 people, including 5 crew members, when it capsized due to strong winds on Saturday. President Trump seeks $10 billion in damages from Rupert Murdoch and the Wall Street Journal. It's over claims he sent a suggestive note to the disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein in 2003. In Los Angeles, at least 28 people have been injured after a vehicle drove into a crowd on Santa Monica Boulevard. It's not currently clear what caused the vehicle to drive into the crowd. Dozens of people have been arrested around the UK at protests in support of Palestine Action. The group was officially designated as a terrorist organisation by the British government earlier this month.
Now on BBC News, in-depth coverage and analysis of the ongoing war in Ukraine. Ukrainecast.
This week, the strongest signs yet that Donald Trump has run out of patience with Vladimir Putin. First, the promise to sell more weapons to Ukraine via NATO allies. And then a new 50-day deadline for peace. And it was reinforced by a threat of secondary tariffs that target countries that deal in Russian oil and gas. And finally, we had reports on multiple media outlets of a private phone call between Donald Trump and President Zelensky, in which he asked if he had the capacity to strike Moscow. So will all of this force Russia to the negotiating table? Or is the Kremlin safe in the knowledge that it has weeks more to wage its war without meaningful consequences? We'll be answering all of your questions this week with our expert panel.
I'm Vitaly Shevchenko.
I'm Olga Robinson.
I'm James Waterhouse.
And I'm Lucy Hockings. This is Ukrainecast.
Ukrainecast from BBC News.
Well, let's start with that 50-day deadline. A lot of you have got questions about it because it's something that can be viewed in lots of different ways. What are you hearing from Ukraine, James?
Well, at the moment, the delivery of Patriot missile systems is being welcomed. You know, what we're hearing is a relief, certainly from colleagues in Kyiv, that Donald Trump has finally announced concrete measures in support of Ukraine. But where we are now moving to is a sort of chasm in terms of detail. How many are going to be delivered and how? We saw a top NATO commander this morning announced in Germany that Germany would be funding 2 of these things via America, but they couldn't say where or when these would be delivered. The German government was unable to provide that detail. I think if you're Ukraine, you've seen deadline after deadline set by the White House and missed, but we shouldn't brush over what is a notable sea change from across the Atlantic.
Because, Vitaly, I had a sense interviewing people earlier in the week that there was a bit of frustration about this deadline. You know, great, another 50 days for Russia to continue with its summer offensive.
I'll give you one quote that I saw on Facebook from a Ukrainian commentator, and he said, the big American nothing is still that. Basically, so much ado about nothing, so much huffing and puffing, and still no fresh weapons deliveries to Ukraine. That's how it's seen in Ukraine. In Russia, I'll give another quote. There was a Russian senator, and he used this phrase. I've not heard it in Russian before. He said, all the steam has gone into the whistle. I imagine implying like a steam engine, but instead of turning the wheels, it's gone into the loud noises. And as we've discussed before, the Russian stock market rebounded after these deadlines and threats, because so far, Donald Trump's and his administration's actions, they have benefited Russia. The delays in weapons supplies, the lack of action as well, no fresh sanctions on Russia, that's benefiting Russia as well. So Donald Trump has bought himself some time, and Vladimir Putin as well.
Yeah, and on that, Olga, no extra concern then being expressed by the Kremlin over this deadline?
Not really, not that we've seen. But I think it's the time question is very important. It's like, how long is it going to take to get all these weapons? And it usually does take quite a bit of time. And Moscow at the moment is playing the waiting game. And the longer they think the longer they can get, the more progress they can actually make on the front line.
When it comes to the time, Donald Trump was asked, okay, so are they being delivered? And he said, yeah, they're being delivered Patriot missiles from Germany, to which the German government spokesman said, well, I'm not aware of that.
We've had lots of questions about the weapons, as you can imagine, with these lines coming from Donald Trump about Washington's intention to send more to Ukraine, but via NATO allies. And this is a great question from Judy in Maidstone, who says, it's reported that France has said it will opt out of the NATO purchase of US arms for Ukraine. Is there a risk of other countries following suit and Ukraine not getting the weapons they need? James, what's the position of France here?
Well, I mean, Emmanuel Macron, like Germany, is grappling with a spending deficit in his government. He's grappling with an ageing population and struggling to get a budget signed off. So if you're dealing with those domestic issues, it is clearly why he is reluctant to commit to paying out billions of dollars for these American systems. So the NATO unit as a whole is just trying to get enough members on the same hymn sheet to be able to stump up the cash and meet the immediacy of Russia's continued invasion of Ukraine. Italy is set to follow suit. We understand that Netherlands, the UK, some Nordic countries are willing and able, but it just shows the difficulty in coordinating Ukraine's most immediate allies when it comes to vital weapons supplies.
Well, I'm sure many of you that are watching and listening will have seen those pictures of President Trump in the Oval Office again, having a good conversation with the NATO Secretary-General, Mark Rutte. We have a question from a listener on that very subject. Janet in the south of France wants to know a bit more about the former Dutch Prime Minister. And she says, I'd be very pleased to hear you talk more about Mark Rutte and NATO's position in relation to the Ukraine war. I feel that Rutte is very different to his predecessor, Jens Stoltenberg, and to my mind, worryingly so. James, we've listened to a lot of press conferences with Stoltenberg and Rutte in our time. Do you think that Janet should be worried about Mark Rutte?
I don't think so. I think they are two different beasts, aren't they? And I watched Jens Stoltenberg arrive in Kiev on countless occasions, certainly since the full-scale invasion, where he would say the same thing. Like a lot of European allies, they would say Ukraine's membership to NATO is irreversible, it's inevitable. He would talk about the need for Ukraine to be supported in order for Europe to be safe. NATO, whilst not letting Ukraine in the gang, is still clearly driven to help in any other way it can. I mean, Ukraine knows what it would like. But then, I mean, you've seen him in the flesh, Mark Rutte. He's got a bit of a a bit more of an obvious tactic that is different to Jens Stoltenberg, but nevertheless with the same message.
I mean, Stoltenberg is a very nice, very measured, very polite man. When I have interviewed him before, he's lovely to the people around him. He is very respectful, and there is a huge amount of respect for him.
Yeah.
Mark Rutte, it feels quite different when you're around him. He has a different kind of charisma, a different kind of energy. And I mean, he had all this criticism about how he treats President Trump, but it's worked. I mean, speaking to Gary O'Donoghue the other day, President Trump reaffirmed his commitment to NATO and to collective defence. So all of that kind of flattery that we've seen from Mark Rutte has worked. And when he speaks, I mean, when I was at the NATO summit in The Hague, people stop, people listen, the TV networks take him because he does have that kind of energy and charisma.
Yeah, well, there are two approaches to Trump, aren't there? One is playing up to his ego with flattery. The other one is pulling your resources together and telling him, well, look, what you're proposing is just not working.
I mean, are we missing a broader change here? You remember as little as a few months ago, we were talking about Europe, having to work out how to go on its own in terms of weapons supply and whether it would be in time for Ukraine. Are we now, with the tactics of Mr. Rutte, seeing a reversion to what was before, where actually, if you're given what Mr. Trump said recently to the BBC, are we now actually just getting America back on side? And will Europe as a bloc be as reliant on America as it was in the past, and will Ukraine be able to directly benefit?
Well, that is what so many people are hoping, and it's the frustration as well that President Trump is expressing towards Vladimir Putin that everyone is sort of honing in on.
There's certainly been a change in rhetoric. The only change of stance that I can detect at this stage is that Donald Trump is no longer opposed to weapons being delivered to Ukraine. However, he's sort of shifted the responsibility for keeping Ukraine supplied with weapons to others.
Yeah.
I think he's allowed others to buy weapons and then maybe pass some of those weapons on to Ukraine, which is different from what Biden did. We are going to give those weapons to Ukraine for free. And Donald Trump is proud of not paying a cent for those weapons going to Ukraine now.
But also you can never rule out the possibility of there being another shift.
Yes.
Later on.
With Donald Trump, you definitely can't. Let's pivot away from diplomacy now. We've got lots of questions to get through and talk about the situation on the ground, because here's a really good question from Sasha.
Hi Ukrainecast, it's Sasha in Newbury. We hear when a drone and or missile attack happens on Ukrainian cities, but there hasn't been much news recently on the situation at the front lines. Is Russia still making small gains? Has there been any reclamation of territory by the Ukrainians? And what about Ukrainian incursions into Kursk and other Russian regions? Thanks.
Can you just bring us up to date, Olga? What's happening on the front line?
So we arguably are not talking a lot about the situation on the front line day to day, because if you look at the control maps, they just don't change that much day to day. But if you look at the wider situation over the past few months, then you can see changes. And arguably, they're not really that much in Ukraine's favor, because Kursk, with the Kursk incursion, they're pretty much out of Kursk. And in fact, the Russians are in Sumy at the moment, which is the region in the north that borders Kursk region in Russia. And it's not huge swathes of territory that they've taken there, but they are there. And Ukrainians have been trying to push back in their area. Then if you look at the east, the situation like in the east where a lot of the fighting has been going on, the Russians are still trying to take Pokrovsk. And, I've been talking about Pokrovsk for like well over a year now. But again, if you look at the wider trend, they have been taking territory, but it's like very grinding, slow progress. But as some of, if you follow Ukrainian soldiers like on social media, they very often say, but they are determined, they have the men, and they just keep pressing, keep pressing, keep pressing. And actually, yesterday, I was reading some comments from Ukrainian war bloggers that are in touch and are aware of the situation on the front line, and were saying that the situation in Pokrovsk is actually getting critical in their view, and it's getting really, really bad for Ukraine. But technically the front line is holding overall, but there are some things that are happening like very gradually that are technically not in Ukraine's favor.
Well, Sasha is right in that Russia's slow progress continues. It's slow, but it continues. But there may come a breaking point when Ukrainian defenses will crumble. And if you look at control of terrain maps, they are beginning to show pincers around Pokrovsk and around the neighboring town of Kostiantynivka. So if Russians slowly encircle and engulf those two towns, that's going to be pretty bad in very practical terms for Ukraine, and also in terms of morale as well.
And what do you hear, particularly on that, James, about morale amongst the soldiers on the front line?
I mean, we talk to guys that come back to Kyiv for respite, and the things they have seen and experienced and been forced to do, retrieve the bodies of dead friends, and then next thing they're back in Kyiv with their other male friends who haven't been called up. They might be exempt, or they might be waiting for the call. There's something Olga said there. The Russians are motivated. We heard something from a soldier. It's not a popular thing to say, where they said, look, the Russians took a particular square of territory. They said, they earned that. They have thrown everything at that. We've defended with our lives, and they have just kept coming in a kind of throwaway comment. And I think we must remind ourselves when we're talking about, yes, Trump perhaps having a little shift in stance. This is not weaponry that will allow Ukraine to counterattack, to liberate territory like we saw more than 3 years ago now. It is merely allowing it to hang on, to protect its people until Russia is pressured to pause in any way. But there is footage around Pokrovsk where you have a Russian armoured vehicle weaving through a road towards the front line, and it's like a vehicle graveyard. It just shows, the vehicle after vehicle that's routinely hit, but eventually, what soldiers will tell you, some get through. And then they're able to re-establish, and the front line collapses some more. And then you look at Bakhmut, which was captured by the Russians in 2023. A Russian was driving around filming there. It's a ghost town, and it is something that Moscow still tries to call liberation.
Do we ever see, or do you both ever see reports from Russian troops on the front line about what morale is like? Is it possible
Not
to sort of
so much
access
from-
any of
I mean,
that experience?
Not so much about morale. I think there are some fairly popular bloggers who are soldiers on the front line, and they can sometimes disagree with the wider point of view about what Russians are doing, Ukrainians are doing. And occasionally they even say, oh, Ukrainians are actually, the drone operators are actually very good. They would acknowledge things like that. They don't tend to talk about morale. It's more about operations and just we're keeping at it. We are now focusing on, because a lot of it is about drone warfare at the moment. And there's just, we are focusing on taking out drone positions, taking out people. And they use also extremely derogatory language whenever it comes to Ukrainians. It's I can't even repeat stuff they say.
Well, there is still a huge amount of interest when it comes to those North Korean soldiers who have been fighting alongside the Russian military. And that's inspired this next question.
Hi, Ukrainecast. It's Scott from Ohio. I was wondering, now that North Korea and Russia are working together openly, what would happen if Ukraine decided to hit one of the North Korean assets, let's say a troop-carrying ship or perhaps droning a factory on their territory? I appreciate it. Thanks.
I struggle to see how Ukraine would launch a long-range drone strike into North Korea, because the longest drone strikes we actually seen from Ukraine would be somewhere in the area of Urals, so it's not even halfway through to North Korea. So from that perspective, I think in order to strike something inside North Korea for Ukraine, there will have to be some sort of operation like Spiderweb of smuggling something into another country and then trying to hit assets there. But it's the question is it really worth it? That kind of logistics, of the whole thing, because the Spiderweb took years to put together. Is it really worth it? Are North Koreans actually contributing in terms of ammunition or weapons as much as the Russian plants and Russian production? It kind of, I think, for Ukraine arguably makes more sense to target militarily, to target industrial places in Russia that produce weapons rather than target North Koreans, who are largely supplying people.
We have a question now, which we received following our episode on Tuesday, in which we discussed an apparent increase in Ukrainian asylum applications that are being rejected by the UK. And don't forget, if you missed it, you can find that anytime by searching for Ukrainecast, wherever you get your podcasts. But let's have a listen to this question. It's from Mandy in the West Midlands, who asks, I've hosted several families and I'm about to host a family who were internally displaced in Ukraine since the start of the war, but found it hard to settle in a new city. My question is, are internally displaced people really able to settle in new areas, as it seems the Home Office thinks they can? And if the UK and other countries send back Ukrainians to safer places, surely it will cause problems for these cities. Thanks. I think we should remind people that this is based on current Home Office guidance, which deems some of Ukraine's western oblasts safe for return or internal relocation. I mean, Olga, this does depend on how we define safe, but what's it like in those western oblasts?
Yeah, I think it does really depend on what we describe as safe, because if you look statistically at the number of Russian attacks on western regions in Ukraine, and I'm basing off data provided by ACLED, which is a non-profit that tracks violent conflicts. If you look in the past 6 months, then there have been 8 or 5 attacks in places like Lviv or Ternopil. So if you compare that to Kiev, which is over 100, and obviously it's way larger number for Kharkiv and other places that Russia has been targeting more consistently. So on paper, it feels like it's safer in the West. But then, you still live there with air raid sirens that pretty much on a regular basis are launched across the country. So it's the mental health also toll that it takes. It's not just, it's not just an attack and damage.
I mean, when you were in Kyiv, James, talking to people, did you look at these Western oblasts and think, oh yeah, they're safe?
There's no doubt there are distinctions that can be made because of the vastness of Ukraine. But I think first and foremost, we are talking about people's homes and the weight of this war that Olga mentions that is felt by absolutely everyone. And the UK government clearly is trying to act on those distinctions to try and control its own immigration levels. But the number of times we as a team have stood somewhere and thought, whether it's in the East, and said, how are people hanging on for this long? And thought, it's their home. It is quite a thing to be forced from your home. It's quite another to be forced to go back to your country that isn't your home. So that is an argument saying you could resettle here. You could be 400 kilometres.
And we have to remember that while people are free to move from one Ukrainian city to another Ukrainian city, which may be, statistically speaking, safer, right? They will only do that. They will be doing that without any government support.
Yeah, and what about Mandy's question, Vitaly? What kind of pressure does it put on those cities if you've got people moving in their families and relatives?
I'll put it this way,
as well?
Upward pressure on housing prices. Yeah, house prices in places like Lviv, they shot up enormously. So if you're prepared to up your sticks and move from Zaporizhia to Lviv, be prepared to pay a lot of money. You'll have to find a new job. You'll have to start a new life. And contrast that with the possibility of moving abroad, where you would be provided with some sort of benefits and government assistance. And I'm not just talking about Britain here. Other countries are available. So that's why more than 5 million Ukrainians have chosen to move abroad rather than to places like Lviv, which are not as safe as Newbury or Manchester.
Last week we talked a little bit about internal politics inside Ukraine, and now we've had a reshuffle, James. Is this the first wartime reshuffle of any major significance that we've seen?
We've seen movers and shakers before, but I think, Rustem Umerov, he hasn't been in post for long, going from Defence Minister to the National Defence Council. But I think seeing a prominent woman, Sydorenko.
When you say prominent, I think...
Entirely disagree.
Well, she has relatively little experience, I would put it this way.
She's on the cabinet.
Yes. And the previous Ukrainian president, Petro Poroshenko, called her Andriy Yermak in a skirt, which refers to this view that she's only doing the bidding for Andriy Yermak, the head of Volodymyr Zelensky's office. So this is the first wartime reshuffle of this magnitude.
Just, can we be clear, Vitaly, who's new in post then? What are the significant changes?
The previous Prime Minister, Denis Shmyhal, he is being nominated for Defence Minister. So that's the key changes. But when it comes to Yulia Sviridenko, she has lots of experience in dealing with Ukraine's foreign partners. She was the one who worked really hard to prepare that minerals deal with America. So people in the States will know her. Maybe that will help. She was at some point Andriy Yermak's deputy as well. So some people, a lot of people in fact, are saying that this will only make it easier for the president's office to keep the government under control.
It is a concentration of power. I think you're right. I think we're moving furniture, but as this war drags on, Zelensky and Andriy Yermak, his all-powerful chief of staff, are consolidating their authority.
And briefly then, Olga, how is the Kremlin going to be viewing all of this?
Well, they will be loving it, because any consolidation of power, any like Zelensky looking at more authoritarian, or any infighting in Ukraine, it's a gift for the Kremlin, because they always, and the Russian state media always pick on it and present like, Ukraine is in chaos. Ukraine is no democratic state.
Another great discussion. Thank you all, and thank you all for your questions. We'll be back with a new Q&A episode next week. Thanks so much for watching. Goodbye.
Ukraine Cast from BBC News.
Live from London, this is BBC News. Donald Trump says troublemakers will never be satisfied in a new outburst over the release of Jeffrey Epstein documents. At least 34 people have died after a tourist boat sank in Vietnam's Ha Long Bay. Rescue teams have so far located 12 survivors. The Syrian president announces an immediate ceasefire in the predominantly Druze area of Sueda province, following days of clashes that have reportedly killed 940 people. In Los Angeles, at least 28 people are injured after a vehicle drove into a crowd on Santa Monica Boulevard. Almost 100 people have been arrested around the UK at protests in support of the proscribed group Palestine Action. And in sport, Rory McIlroy makes a strong start on day 3 of the Open, but can he catch the leaders? Hello, I'm Lauren Taylor. Donald Trump has weighed in again on the row over legal files relating to the late sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein. On Friday, he asked for grand jury testimony to be made public. But now, in a possible sign of frustration with the ongoing controversy, he's also said troublemakers will never be satisfied, no matter what action he takes. In a post on his Truth Social website, he said, "I've asked the Justice Department to release all grand jury testimony with respect to Jeffrey Epstein, subject only to court approval." He then adds, "With that being said, and even if the court gave its full and unwavering approval, nothing will be good enough for the troublemakers and radical left lunatics making the request." And he concludes it will always be more, more, more. Well, that comes after the president said he was seeking at least $10 billion in damages from the Wall Street Journal and its owner, Rupert Murdoch, after the paper reported that he wrote a suggestive birthday message to Epstein. Mr. Trump says the document is fake. The paper says it will defend its reporting vigorously. Our North America correspondent Arunade Mukherjee reports from Washington. Well, he's with us, joining us now. So, Arunade, President Trump has appears to be acknowledging that his attempt to move on from this may not work.
Well, this is what he's been trying to do in repeated interactions with the press. Whenever a question comes up when it relates to Jeffrey Epstein, he's expressed a lot of frustration, a lot of impatience, saying, why are we still talking about this? It's time to move on. He can't understand the fixation when it comes to Jeffrey Epstein. But, you know, despite whatever he said over the past few weeks, everything that's the opposite has happened, because the focus still very much remains on Jeffrey Epstein and now his relationship once again with Donald Trump by way of that article which came out in the Wall Street Journal. So this continues to be an issue that Donald Trump would certainly not want to continue talking about. But there you have it. He's sort of been putting out these posts on his social networking website, Truth Social, the latest one coming up earlier in the day. But the focus essentially remains on that plea that now they've put forth in court, where they're asking the judge to give permission to unseal those grand jury testimony. But it's not going to be as simple, as said, because, it's going to be difficult, because this is going to be subject to court approval. Only if the judge feels that these should be released in the public interest, that's when they go ahead and do that. Because ordinarily, these kind of transcripts are kept secret, they are protected by law, so the judge has to have very good reason. Which is why you're seeing Donald Trump also talk about the fact that, if the judge does agree eventually, it's not going to be enough to satisfy those who've been demanding this. So still lots left, and we can expect many more developments in the coming days.
And how big a schism has this caused among Mr. Trump's supporters?
I think that's where the the challenge has been for Donald Trump, given the fact that a lot of the opposition has not just come in from his political opponents or critics, but also from members within the Republican Party and also those who've supported the Make America Great Again campaign as well, his core voter base, who've expressed a lot of dissatisfaction and anger as well, saying that, this is something that was talked about during election campaigns, that they would do this, but then the sense that they've been getting is that they are backtracking. You had statements coming out of the Attorney General Pam Bondi, who had said that, earlier said that, look, there's a stack of files that just waiting for me to release them, and then you haven't done that. There have been memos coming in from the FBI and the Department of Justice, which have seemed to be drawing a line under this particular case, saying that they didn't have any client list. So that has led to the dissatisfaction, and, also fanned conspiracy theories that, there are attempts to try and protect the high and mighty and the influential.
And the battle lines drawn now also between Mr. Trump and the Wall Street Journal and Rupert Murdoch.
Absolutely, you know, that's going to be one to watch out for. Both of them have shared a fairly problematic relationship, or rather an interesting relationship. You know, they've known each other for decades. Donald Trump not mincing his words in that Truth Social post that came in last night when he talked about this being a powerhouse suit that he's filed against Rupert Murdoch, the Wall Street Journal, the parent company, and those two correspondents. Interestingly, Rupert Murdoch was also seen with Donald Trump in the same box when they were watching the finals of the FIFA game. And, you know, Rupert Murdoch also owns Fox, which many people have credited to have played some sort of a role in propelling Donald Trump to the White House. So a very interesting relationship, and the dynamics certainly very interesting. And obviously in the days ahead, as this lawsuit progresses, will be one to closely watch out for.
Arindam Mukherjee, thank you very much indeed. To get a sense of how the legal processes behind those decisions work, I spoke to retired US Federal Court Judge Shira Shendlin. The law firm she currently works for has represented some of Jeffrey Epstein's victims, but she herself has not worked on those cases. Let's take a listen.
So it's very important to understand there's two sets of documents. There's grand jury testimony, the transcript of that testimony, but there's also documents that are not part of the grand jury at all. So the executive branch controls the documents produced by the FBI or by the prosecutors. That's in the hands of the executive branch, and the executive branch, which is the attorney general or the president, can decide to release those. Then there's grand jury testimony, a grand jury record, and that's in the hands of the judiciary. Now that the government has requested the release of grand jury material, it is up to the judge to decide whether to release those materials.
And how likely is it that a judge would decide to release it?
So there's a controlling case in the Second Circuit, which is the New York Court of Appeals, the federal circuit in New York. And it happened to be a lower court case of mine that went up to the Second Circuit on appeal. And I was affirmed, but in that decision, the Second Circuit set forth nine criteria that would help the judge decide whether to release it. And it said, first of all, that the court has the discretion to do it, and it's a very broad discretion that the judge has. And it depends if there are special circumstances. And so it said public curiosity alone is not enough, but there are other things that should be considered. So first one is, who's the party seeking the disclosure? And here it's the government, and that's pretty powerful, because the second question is whether the defendant or the government opposes disclosure. Well, Epstein's dead. He's not opposing disclosure. Maxwell may have been a subject of that grand jury, and I don't know if she's taken a position, but the government is seeking it, so the government's not opposing it. The third factor is, why is the disclosure sought? And the reason seems to be because of public interest here. The fourth factor is, what exact information is being sought? And we don't know that. I don't know if they're seeking more than just a certain witness testimony or the entire transcript. The fifth factor, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask you whether, so there's quite a lot of factors to be considered here. And, and you mentioned that it's not just grand jury testimony that is available. If it's just grand jury testimony that is released eventually by a judge, will that answer the public's questions, or will there still be more coming out?
Well, there should be more. I don't know the answer because I don't know what's in the grand jury testimony. No one knows right now. But I assume that the bulk of the information is actually the FBI documents, the Department of Justice documents, the prosecutor's documents. That's what the executive can control, and that's what probably should be released. It is not secret. The public has an interest. A lot of people have an interest in that, including victims. So the bulk of the documents, I think I've heard 80%, is in the executive branch, not in the grand jury.
At least 34 people have died after a tourist boat sank off the coast of Vietnam. The vessel was carrying 48 passengers and 5 crew when it capsized during sudden heavy rain, strong winds and lightning. Rescuers say continual rain is hindering their search. It's thought about 14 people are still missing. Local media reports that most of the people on board are families visiting from the capital, Hanoi. Vietnam's Prime Minister has sent his condolences to the families of the victims. Authorities say they're working to investigate the cause of the incident. Well, the boat capsized in Halong Bay, a UNESCO World Heritage Site located around 125 miles northeast of Hanoi. Halong Bay is one of Vietnam's most popular tourist destinations, attracting millions of visitors each year, with boat tours especially popular. Syrian internal security forces are deploying in the south of the country to try to end deadly clashes between different factions. There have been fears that the sectarian fighting could escalate into another regional crisis after Israel also became involved. Israel has been striking Damascus and the province of Suwaida, saying its forces were seeking to protect the minority Druze community. Israel and Syria have now agreed a ceasefire. More than 700 people are reported to have been killed in the province since last Sunday amid local violence. From Damascus, here's our correspondent John Donnison, and a warning: you may find some details in his report distressing.
This morning, in and around Suwaida, it didn't look much like a ceasefire. Bedouin tribesmen in running gun battles with fighters from the minority Druze community.